Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here again for another mini masterclass. Today, we're going to talk about what the bus. This is something I'm excited about doing because I get these questions all the time. What's the difference between this and that? Is this a bus? Is this not a bus? What do you use this for? What do you use that for? So we're going to talk about not only buses today, but also control groups. And the important thing is the difference between them. And I think that's what drives most of the confusion. So we're going to be looking at mains, groups, aux, mains, matrix, DCAs, mute groups, and gangs. So all different things. The most important distinction to make here is the difference between buses and control groups. Okay, so not all of those things I listed are buses. We're going to clear up which is which, but there is a very important difference between buses and control groups. So that difference is that buses sum audio. So there's summing. We are combining and intermingling audio in a bus. In a control group, we're doing control only. So just in another way to look at that, buses contain audio. They combine audio. Control groups do not intermingle or combine audio. We are just dealing with control. So drive it home one more time. Buses sum and combine audio. Control groups do not. There is no audio in control groups. Okay, so that's the main difference to focus on. And I think people get really hung up on that stuff. So let's look at the different types of buses. And first bus we have here is the main. That's what most people connect to the PA system for front of house, but that's not the only use for it. You can use it in broadcast. You can use it for your lead vocal when you're doing monitors. There's no set in stone use for these things, but it is a unique bus. And here are the main characteristics of a main. You've got a fully variable send, meaning that you have a fader or a knob, if you prefer, that controls the send amount infinitely. So you can change the level. Mains are sent from the main channel fader on almost every console out there. Main sends are always post fader. There's no pre-fader send for a main because it's being sent from the main fader. So moving that fader changes the audio sends to the main bus. And main buses are always post-processing as well. There's no variable pick-off point or different places. So any processing that you put on the channel will be sent to the main. To a main, you can send inputs, effects returns, and groups, mono or stereo, can all be sent to the main bus. Okay. Next type of bus here is a group. So groups are quite different than the main or any other bus because they are an on-off send. There is no send level into a group. So it's either in the group or it's out of the group. Groups are always post fader, and that's where you get your variability in send. So generally you would use a group on its way to the main. So you would use the main channel fader as your send level into the group because it is post fader. And groups, again, are always post-processing. There is no variable pickoff point for a group in most cases because they are going to be sent to the main. Into a group, you can send inputs and effects returns. So it's a pretty straightforward bus. This is usually used to sum audio, as I said, on the way to the mains. And in most cases, you would send it to the group and then to the mains, and the channels would not go to the main directly. Everything would pass through the group, and they would be unassigned from the main directly so that they wouldn't be going to the main in two different paths. In a lot of consoles, that will be extremely problematic because you would have a time shift and therefore a phase differential between inputs going directly to the main and inputs going through a group and then to the main. So be careful with that on a console if it doesn't have a red ampersand on it. All of our Heath digital mixers are mix coherent or phase coherent. So you can do that if you wish without having any phase differential. But definitely be careful with that on other consoles because not many desks are phase coherent or mix coherent. Okay. Auxes are a bus that's, I would say most commonly used for monitors, but again, there's no set in stone use for any of these. You could use Auxes for whatever you want. We have a lot of people that use a stereo aux for their broadcast stream on their front of house desk. Auxes are great because they're basically, they can be very separate from the mains. It's kind of, aux stands for auxiliary. So it's it's an ancillary or auxiliary bus that can be disassociated with the mains if you like. So auxes have an infinitely variable send. So you have a fader or a knob that controls the send level at any point you want. Auxes can be pre or post the main fader. Again, decoupling them from and making them separate from the main mix and the main fader. They also have a selectable pickoff point. So you can choose to divert to an aux at any point in the signal path. So you can leave before the EQ, after the EQ, after the compressor, or after all of your processing, which would be post delay. So you have a lot of flexibility in an aux. And auxes accept input from inputs, effects returns, and groups. So you can subgroup into an aux. And obviously you can do any of your individual inputs and the returns from your effects. So really great for monitors, as I said, but also really good for doing broadcast streaming, submixes, any types of things like that where you need to do summing and processing away from the mains. Then we have matrices. So matrices are like the ultimate bus because they have infinitely variable sends. They can be pre or post fader. They are always post processing. But what really makes a matrix special is that they can accept they can accept audio from inputs, effects returns, the main bus, groups, auxes. So you can basically send anything into a matrix, including previously summed inputs. So it's a good place to stir a lot of things together. So you could have your main mix that's going to the PA, but then add extra vocal and maybe a little something else, and put it into a matrix and send that to your front fills. Or you take your main mix, and you subtract something from it, and then you send that to the lobby feed. Or matrices are really good for alternate places. When you're doing a 2-track recording on a D-Live or any other console, it's a good idea to send your main left, right, or whatever bus you're going to be recording through a matrix first, so that you can do separate processing. You may want to do some compression or some light limiting on it on its way to record, and then you have a separate send level of that mix to the recording versus the primary destination for that mix. So matrices are really good. They accept pretty much anything. Okay, so those are the main types of buses. And remember, with buses, we're summing, combining audio. Buses have processing like EQ and compression on them. And so next we're going to look at control groups. And control groups are very different because it is not a bus. There is no summing and there is no audio in a control group. This is something that I get all the time. So sorry if I'm hammering this at you a little bit, but as I said, these are questions that I get over and over and over again. So just want to make sure we're clear there. All right, so types of control groups, most common types of control groups. DCA would probably be the most common one. Okay, DCA stands for digitally controlled amplifier. The nomenclature doesn't make a lot of sense because there is no amplifier, but it comes from something that we had in analog consoles that were called VCAs, or voltage control amplifiers, where there actually was an electrical amplifier that controlled the voltage of a group of master faders. So you would link master faders together, and basically what this allows you to do is change the relative level of a set of faders, maintaining their relative position to one another, but moving them as one. So it's basically like, perfectly moving faders in unison, while keeping their relative position. The important thing about DCAs is they do not contain audio, so there's no summing involved. So you can control a lot of faders without summing audio, okay? So they link the master faders of inputs together, inputs and effects returns. and aux groups, matrices, and mains. You can, as we'll see in a minute, you can put pretty much anything into a DCA. But all it's doing is linking the faders together. It doesn't set their levels the same. It keeps their relative positions, but it just allows you to move them as one. And a DCA can contain inputs, effects returns, aux, groups, mains, or matrix, at least in an Allen Heath console. And so you can have a lot of control. Most common thing for this is, you would set your mix of your drums. So you've got, your kick drums at 0 and your snare is at -3 and your hi-hats at -5. And, wherever you have your mix done, you assign them all to a DCA, and then you can keep that relative blend, but you can turn the drums up and down with one fader. Again, without summing them. All right. So the next type of control group here is a mute group. This is a really simple one. It may seem painfully obvious, but it is a control group, so I thought it was important to include it. All a mute group does is links mute together. So you can mute a whole bunch of things with just one mute, the mute group master. And a mute group can contain, again, inputs, effects returns, aux, groups, mains, matrix. Most important use for a mute group is your all mute. This should be the first thing that you do when you set up on a console, is build yourself an all mute. And this is mostly for safety reasons. You do have people's ears, is the most important thing, but you also have speakers and other things that could be severely damaged by an unexpected surge in audio. So you need to have an all mute accessible before you start passing audio. And so if you have 110 dB of unexpected pterodactyl noise coming out of your console, you can very quickly smash that mute group and turn everything off all at once. So mute groups are super useful. You can use them to, bring in and out different families of inputs or whatever you want to do. So take advantage of mute groups. And then we have a very unique type of control group in Allen Heath consoles called gangs. You'll find the ganging section in your favorite A&H desk, and gangs let you do control linking. Sorry, we have someone that wants to share their morning with us. Thanks for that. There we go. Okay, so control groups. The last one here is a gang. And again, this is a unique one that you won't find on other desks. Gangs allow you to do control function linking of inputs to other inputs, groups to other groups, auxes to other auxes, matrices to other matrices. So they can only be like for like control group functionality, but you can use them across the across variable types of audio paths. A gang can be between 2 and 10 inputs. They don't have to be adjacent to one another, and you can link anything across as long as they're like for like. So again, input for inputs with inputs, groups with groups, etc. The cool thing about a gang is that you can choose one, multiple, or all of these attributes to link together. So I can link the trim, filter, gate, PEQ, compressor, delay, fader, which would be the main send fader, the mute, the pan, or the routing. And the routing would be the send level or assignment or assignment to any bus other than the main. So I can choose to link in any of these attributes in whatever combination I want across multiple inputs or multiple send buses to have linked control. They are really great, so I recommend that you check them out. Okay, well, I hope this cleared some things up for you. Does anyone have any questions about that? I know we went through it pretty quick, but it is pretty straightforward once you get the basic hang of it. Anyone got any questions? You can chime in with your mic or use the chat window if anyone's got any questions on that. I'll give it a few more seconds and see if any. I know sometimes you guys are shy. Don't be shy. There are no dumb questions. We're all just here to learn together. So,
I got a question about using the auxes in stereo or mono mode.
okay.
On the input channels, when you say, let's say 9 and 10 are going to be keyboard, and you can link 9 and 10 together, the fader on the number 10 fader goes dark automatically. unless you assign another input to it, which is perfect. I mean, it makes total sense.
It actually becomes one channel, so there's only one fader.
Right,
There's
right,
one fader, there's one EQ, there's one compressor, you know.
which is perfect. But what about when I use a stereo in-ear? So let's say I want to use aux 5 and 6 to Joe's in-ear. When I link those two together, nothing changes on the board when I go to select the aux buttons.
In our consoles, we don't link Auxes. We have stereo Auxes and we have mono Auxes. So you would set that bus to be mono or stereo. It's always just going to be the one number for the one bus. So we don't take 5 and 6 and link them together. We would just make aux 5 a stereo aux. Does that make sense?
But not for outputs, because there's
It's
no such things as a stereo XLR. So I'm trying to
yeah,
put it
you would still have two patch points, and those two
right.
patch points can be any patch points on the desk. But what we're talking about is processing within the console. So auxes are different from physical sockets. We can link any aux to any physical socket later. You know, that's part of the patching process. But as far as, you know, processing and mixing within the desk, we're going to determine an aux to be stereo. And then it will have one fader, but it will have a pan now, so that you can pan your inputs to the left or right side of that stereo aux.
Well, okay, so in this example, let's say like I say, I link 5 and 6.
There is no way to link 5 and 6. I think that's where you're getting stuck. You can
Okay, I'm linking the
control
outputs
link
of
5 and 6, but then
right?
you're only linking control of 2 mono auxes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't link the audio of 5 and 6 and make them a summing pair. There's no way to do that in our desks. There are other consoles that do get stereo auxes by linking 2 mono auxes. That's just not the way that we do it. We choose
Okay.
to make
So,
a stereo aux.
so how would you do that in this case? How would you say that you want aux 5 and aux 6 out to be the stereo feed to an in-ear? Like,
So you would make either aux 5 or aux 6. You would designate them as a stereo aux. Okay, so it depends. So if you're on an SQ, each
yes.
bus has a mono stereo switch on it. If you're on an Avantis or a D Live, you go into the setup screen, and in the switch up here,
I think we need to mute that guy.
yeah, I had to find him. So yeah. So in Avantis or a D Live, you have this assignment window, and you
Right.
have columns for mono or stereo. And so you
Right.
decide how many mono auxes you want, how many stereo auxes you want.
Right.
So you set, and they will be designated on the strip. They will have, if they're a stereo aux, they will have an ST by them, and it will just be one number. It won't be 5 and 6 that are linked. It will be stereo aux 5. And then once you've done that, then you will mix it just as a stereo aux. And I think where you're getting hung up is in the patch. And when you go to the patch bay, you go to outputs, and you can see your monos and your stereos, and you can
Right.
patch them to any sockets you like. So you know, does that make more sense now?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking for some reason that if I patch aux outputs 5 and 6 as my stereo aux, that the physical button on the console for 6 should go dark because it cannot it's not assigned to anything.
It doesn't, no console knows where you're sending the audio. It doesn't know that on the other end of that XLR is a stereo in-ear. It only does what you tell it. And the patching out on a digital console is completely separate from the processing decisions that you make. So, and that's one of the great things about digital consoles, is that you can you can have mono things going wherever you want. You can have stereo things going wherever you want. You can, you can patch any console resource to any physical XLR socket. And they don't have to be, one particular thing or another. So
Okay.
in the patch bay, you may patch it to a stereo in-ear, but the console has no way to know that that's a stereo in-ear on the other end of that. So it just knows that you want two XLRs, and what you're going to send out is mono aux 5 and mono aux 6. So the way that you have to do that is create a stereo aux, and then it will know, hey, this is stereo that's going out together, and it will link the patch of two adjacent outputs.
Okay.
Give it a try. I think it will be clear to you.
Yeah, I just get confused. Like when I got that, if I push the aux 6 button on my SQ5, am I doing anything? Because it's not
Yes.
really connected
Yes,
to.
on an SQ, you have all the mixes are mono or stereo. So you don't lose
Mhm.
any. So
Yeah,
you're not linking 5 and 6. You're making
right.
5 stereo and leaving 6 mono. You still have the same number of buses, just one of them's now stereo.
So when
So
I touch 5, I'm affecting if I got a patch straight through, I'm really affecting 5 and 6 outputs by one.
if you patch them there, but see,
Yeah.
auxiliary 5 does not necessarily have to come out socket 5 and 6.
That is true, but I'm trying to keep less of variables here in my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah. So
Yeah.
but you've got stereos in the mix there, pun intended, you're not going to have them one for one, because then aux 7 is going to the next one in line would be output socket 7.
Right.
For
Right.
aux 6 would be coming out output socket 7. So that's
Right.
just part of life in digital consoles. There's no more everything lines up one to one anymore, but it also
Yeah.
gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility, because previously you couldn't just take a mono aux and make it stereo. So
Oh, I love the
those are the
flexibility of the
caveats that we
yeah.
have with digital.
It's awesome. Anyway, thanks for your time. Yeah.
No problem at all. Okay, let's see. Do A&H consoles compensate for latency on a single path taking multiple routes through the console? So we don't. Yes, we do. We have a fixed latency, so we don't do active latency compensation, which can be tremendously problematic. I know other console manufacturers have tried to implement that later on to try and get some phase coherency in their desk. But personally, I don't want my latencies shifting all over the place. It makes timing things further down the chain really difficult. So we have a fixed latency, which is really unique. And as long as you keep a linear path, meaning you don't go backwards through the console, we are latency compensated and therefore phase coherent. So you can go input to group to mains is the same as input to mains. You can go input to mains to matrix is the same as input to matrix, things like that. So yes, we do. We have timed out things so that they are latency compensated and therefore mixed coherent. And they are, most importantly, they are mixed coherent at a fixed latency. So you can check out more about all the different ways that you can go through the desk and keep your phase coherency on the web. But the general rule is that if you keep going forward linearly, you will be fine and mixed coherent. The problems come in is if you go from a group back into an input, or you go from the main back into something and you go backwards and you don't keep a linear path, then those are not latency compensated. Okay. If you choose a stereo aux for IEM, what about panning? Where can I see this? So when you are sending to a stereo aux or any stereo mix, the pan on the channel is the pan to that bus. So if I go, let me get back up here. So if I go, this is I got to find a stereo. There's a stereo matrix. If I go send to that stereo matrix, then my channel pan here is the pan to that matrix. And it will stay that until I go back to my send to mains, and then I'm back to my main. Or if I switch to another stereo bus, then it will be the pan for that bus. So the pan above the channel, or associated with that channel, is always going to be the pan to the active bus. In some consoles, like DLive, for example, you can associate your bus pan your matrix or aux pan with the main pan. It's called follow pan in DLive. So that when you pan left, right to the mains, it will also pan left, right in the buses that you choose. And you can also do inverse follow pan. So if you were doing monitors from front of house, you've got stereo in-ears on stage, you can pan left to the front of house and it would go right in your stereo auxes so that you keep your perspective right for your people on in-ears. But anytime you're looking for the pan, it's dependent on your active bus. So if you're sending to the mains by your mix key or other bus decision button, it would be your mix send button if you're on an SQ, but on a DLive or Avantis, it would be the mix key. That not only sets your rotary encoder or your fader as sending to that particular bus, but it also designates your pan to that particular bus. Hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions? Those are good ones. Okay.